A very good evening, everyone, and thanks, Vicky, for inviting me, for giving me this opportunity, and also to introduce me the way I wanted it to keep. And now I would like to wish a very good evening to all the students and welcome all of you. And my topic for the day is the art of the pages. Am I visible and audible to everyone? Can you just say or put a
Yes,
yes or
yes,
thumbs up
yes, yes.
in
Yes, yes.
the
Yes,
comment section?
you are visible. Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So I'll request the rest of you to turn off your mics and I'll begin. So before I begin my session for the day, I would like to give two disclaimers. Um, One is that, pardon my French, I haven't been a student of French ever, and there's a lot of terminology, a lot of words in French, so just excuse me if I go wrong with the pronunciations. And the second thing is that the discipline that we are looking at today is a relatively new discipline that not many of us are aware of. So I'd like to tell you what I'm looking at is the nature and the scope of the discipline as opposed to the literary history, the conventional literary history or canonical literature that we know. So, with these two things in mind, I'd like to move on. So, before I start presenting, there is a book that I would like to show all of you. If on a winter's night, a traveler. Okay? If on a winter's night, a traveler by Italo Calvino, and I'm going to show you the picture, the cover, and also the dust jacket and so on in my presentation. But I'd briefly like to read what the dust jacket says so that you get an idea why I'm getting into this. So here I go. This is what the synopsis or the dust jacket of Italo Calvino reads. You go into a bookshop and buy If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. You like it, but there is a printer's error in your copy. You take it back to the shop and get a replacement. But the replacement seems to be a totally different story. You try to track down the original book you were reading, but end up with a different narrative again. This remarkable novel leads you through many different books, including a detective adventure, a romance, a satire, an erotic story, a diary, and a quest. But the hero of them all is you, the reader. Okay? So this was the synopsis of the book, and as you might have noticed that this is a kind of intriguing, exciting, unconventional kind of novel that something that we haven't really seen before. So if you must have noticed that it is addressed to you. It is not a story about, say, Elizabeth Bennet or, say, Darcy, but it is a story about you, the reader. Throughout the book, you will see that the narration is in the second person. So the writer is directly talking to you, and the text, it is very aware. It is aware of itself. Okay, it is a text that talks about reading, writing, pages, readers, authors, translators, the process of printing as a process. For instance, the first paragraph reads, "You are about to begin reading this book. Find the most comfortable position, seated or stretched or curled up." So it is just trying to, make you feel comfortable as though you are trying to set your environment to really start reading. Okay. Now, with this in mind, I'm going to begin my presentation. Just keep this book and the nature of this book in mind for now. So I'm going to begin with the presentation. Can you all see it? Okay.
Not yet, Vidisha. I guess
Hello?
you have. Yeah, you have to
Yes.
click on the present now. It's not visible yet.
Okay, I did. Can you see the presentation? Not yet.
Yeah. Now it's visible. It's visible
It
now.
is? Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so the topic is The Art of the Pages, a discussion on the history of books. Okay, now this is the overview, the contents that I'm going to talk about. What is the history of books, the background of the discipline, the nature of the discipline, the communication circuit model, an important concept, publishing history of what is question. This is a case study. Work and culture in an 18th century printing shop. This is also a case study. Toward a history of reading, we see how reading has evolved over the centuries. Then the history of the book in the Indian context, and then a case study from my own dissertation exploring manuscripts and scribal culture in India, and finally navigating through the pages. Okay, so what is history of books? So it goes by different names actually. In French, it's known as Histoire du Livre. In German, it is known as Geschichte des Buchwesens. And in English, History of Books or History of the Book. So these are the different names that it is known by. And it is a very important new discipline that is relatively unexplored or relatively unknown. It can also be referred to as the social and cultural history of communication by print. But there are many scholars who also try to go into the preprint area and explore manuscripts and codex and so on. So, what is the history of books? How is it different? So, you know that as readers, as book lovers, most of us or literature students, we are accustomed to, feeling the book, or we are very excited to buy a new book, or now we don't really go to bookshops, but we order them online. And even when we are getting our own copy, it feels like you're gifting yourself something. You're pretty much excited. And as for bibliophiles, the physical book itself is a source of pleasure. For example, you like to maintain it, you like to cover it, you like to put your name on it. The act of owning the book and claiming it to be yours, labeling it, okay? Many of us are huge fans of the smell of old books, book lovers especially. Some might be allergic to it, but most of us, we love the smell of old books, which is also known as vinegar. So, what history of books does is that it tries to look at the book as a physical entity. We are not looking at what the story is, what the content is, who the writer is, and so on. We are treating the book, the page, as a physical object, okay, as a material entity. And so there are three phases that we study. Number one is the production of the book, number two, the circulation, and number three, the consumption. And also the different factors, that is the social, cultural, and political circumstances involved, and the impact of these books on the society. So, what is the objective of this subject? That it is to understand how ideas were transmitted through print and how exposure to the printed word has affected the thought and behavior of mankind. Basically, what happened to humanity, our modes of thinking, our perception after print. So, this is the nature, this is what the subject is about. Now, a brief background. So, since the Renaissance, the book came to be regarded as a material object. But book history as a discipline has its origin in 19th century analytical bibliography in England. Now, there are a few names there, the library, Björsenblatt, and Deutschen Buchhandel. So these were some of the journals, some of the papers, which started to talk about analytical bibliography, which is basically the physical description of books, their classification, categorization, description, and so on. But in the 1960s, in an institute known as École Pratique des Hautes etudes. There were a couple of publications like La Version du Livre by Lucien Febvre and Henry Jean Martin. So, with the establishment of this institute, there was a new turn, a departure in this subject, a new perception, which was a kind of far removed from analytical bibliography. So, there is a shift. So, from mere analytical bibliography, we are moving to the production and consumption patterns of book over stretches of time. And most importantly, these book historians, they were not interested in the canonical texts, the famous texts or the classics, the what the elite readers usually read, but they were interested in what the extremely ordinary readers, the working class and so on, what they are reading. And one of this genre is the Bibliothèque Blue, which were sort of chapbooks and short stories of a very scandalous and thrilling nature and so on. And they wanted to focus on the literary experience of the ordinary readers. So initially, these book historians, and critiques, they started meeting in cafes and so on. And from cafes, they move on to conferences. So by the late 1970s, book history was already an international discipline, especially in Europe and North America. Now, the same book again, this is the cover of If on a Winter's Night, and this is the dust jacket. I've already read out the blurb to you. Now, I'm reading one or two lines from the same book. The pleasures derived from the use of a paper knife are tactile, auditory, visual, and especially mental. Progress in reading is preceded by an act that traverses the material solidity of the book to allow you access to its incorporeal substance. So again, you see that this chapter is acknowledging the physical nature of the book. And one or two more paragraphs that I would like to read. So this book basically, I can't give you any spoilers because there is no scope for any spoilers. So don't worry. It is a story about one reader who has picked up If on a Winter's Night, and after he begins to read, he notices there is a printer's mistake, a printing mistake, and so he goes back to the bookseller, and he finds out. He meets another reader there, the other reader, and throughout the text they are addressed as the reader and the other reader. And they embark on this journey to kind of find out the original text that they were reading. But each path, each point of their journey, they are led to a different book altogether. Okay? So this is what the other reader says. There is a boundary line. On one side, there are those who make books. On the other, those who read them. I want to remain one of those who read them, so I take care always to remain on my side of the line. Otherwise, the unsullied pleasure of reading ends, or at least it is transformed into something else which is I do not want. This boundary line is tentative, it tends to get erased. The world of those who deal with books professionally is more and more crowded and tends to become one with the world of the readers. Of course, readers are growing more numerous, but it would seem that those who use books to produce other books are increasing more than those who read books just for the sake of it and nothing else. So, this is what the other reader believes. And when the first reader goes to the printing, the photocopying shop to find out the original copy, this is what he realizes. Somewhere, the complete volume must exist. You look around, seeking it with your gaze, but promptly lose heart. In this office, books are considered raw materials, spare parts, gears to be dismantled and reassembled. Now you understand Ludmila's refusal to come with you. Ludmila is the name of the other reader. You are gripped by the fear of also having passed to the other side and of having lost that privileged relationship which books, with books which is peculiar to the reader. the ability to consider what is written as something finished and definitive, to which there is nothing to be added, from which there is nothing to be removed. So these were just two paragraphs that I wanted to read out to point out the difference between the physicality, the process of the manufacturing of the book, and the world, the mental universe of someone who is an avid or passionate reader. Now, what is the nature of the discipline? So, book history requires collaboration between lots of people, which could be authors, publishers, historians, librarians, and so on and so forth. So, that is why, by nature, it is very interdisciplinary. You will find that there is a crisscrossing of various disciplines, and there is scope for in this process there is scope for a lot of transaction that happens between these different people. And also, as I told you earlier, that we are not looking at canonical literary history or the grand narratives of history as we know them. We are looking at the micro histories, the sociological and ethnographical study that book history enables us to do. It also studies the material conditions in which these books were produced. Then it is very anecdotal in nature. So a book historian actually has to go down to the roots, to some printing press, to some library records, and so on. It requires a lot of archival work and so on, and it is full of anecdotes. How that you will see in the forthcoming slides. Now, Robert Danton, you're going to see this name many times in my presentation. He is one of the pioneers of the field of book history, and this is the communication circuit model by Danton. And what it does is it helps us understand the different people and the different stages involved in the production of a book or in the history of the book. So the first one, as you can see, is the author and publisher. Next, you have the printers, compositors, pressmen, warehousemen. Then you have the suppliers who give you paper, ink, and provide you labor. Then you have shippers, the agents, the smugglers, entrepot keepers, wagoners, and so on. Then you have booksellers from whom the readers procure the books. Finally, you have the binder and the readers. So in the readers, you also have people who actually purchase books, people who borrow books from others, and reading clubs and libraries and so on. Now, I think the second and the third stage, that is the printers and shippers, kind of might sound unusual to you all, but let me tell you, Robert Danton is someone who specializes, who's highly specialized, in fact, in the history of the book in the 18th century. So, a smuggler or a wagoner or a warehouseman, these are the people you will see who are major parts of the book trade in the 18th century. Now, if you see the first three, they deal with the production and the transportation, okay, or the distribution of books. And finally, the readers deal with the consumption phase, the last phase. And then in the center, you have the different factors that affect this entire process, like intellectual influences, socio-cultural, socio-political circumstances, and the law, and so on. So this is the communication circuit modeling by Robert Danton. And now this is a case study again by Danton. This is about the publishing history of Voltaire's Questions. So there was a firm in the 18th century known as the STN, that is Société Typographique des Neuchâtel, which was a firm who provided books to the booksellers across France mostly. And it is through the archives of the STN that Danton is trying to recreate what a bookshop was like and what were the influences, what were the socio-cultural factors that affected the selling of books and the buying of books during the Enlightenment. So he talks about Pierre Rigaud of Montpellier, who is an 18th century bookseller. And Darton asks us to think of the bookseller as a cultural agent. So this case study, it is done with the help of the exchange of letters. There were some exchange of letters between Rigo and between the Estienne in the process of procuring the books and giving orders and so on. And it is through this study that Danton is trying to arrive at certain conclusions. So, what do we observe from Rigo's transaction is that he kind of did not stock the books. Certain books they were very famous, or certain writers, thinkers. For instance, Voltaire during the Enlightenment. So the other booksellers in Montpellier and the surrounding regions, they had ordered hundreds of copies of Voltaire's questions, but Rigaud was someone who was very cautious in his business. So he ordered only 30 copies. The others were ordering 100. He ordered only 30 copies. He would scan, he would read through all of the books, and he would see what he would kind of anticipate the response that the readers would have, and then if required he would further order, he would place an order for more copies. So Rigaud, in his method of business, he was very cautious. He was a visionary. He took minimum risks, and at the same time, because he did not order books in bulk, like only one author in bulk, we see that his bookshop also had a variety of genres to offer in comparison to the other booksellers. Now, because the economic and political pressures kept shifting, they had to readjust their arrangements, and there were a lot of middlemen, like the peddlers and smugglers, who were linked to the printing houses. Now, according to this case study, Voltaire was infamous for kind of uh, encouraging piracy. So, because he was not writing these books for profit, it was mainly to spread the ideas of the Enlightenment. So, he made a deal with another printing house called, by the name Framer, owned by Framer, and he said that I will give you the corrections, additions, corrected version, and he would give the STM another, the previous edition, and so on. So he would promise one printing house one thing, and he would suddenly cancel the deal, and he would go wherever, whoever was more quicker. So in this process, Rego and STN kind of had a fallout. So you see this tension because of the shifting circumstances. And now in this circuit that we see, reading the reader remains the most difficult stage, because we can look at the printing presses, and we can look at the booksellers through certain exchange of letters or accounts and so on. But readers do not generally maintain a kind of record. So to get into the mental universe of the reader was something very difficult. And all of these stages, they are affected by different social, economic, political circumstances. Now, this is yet another work by Danton. So here he's talking about the working culture in an 18th century printing shop. Now, when as a student or as a research scholar or even as a teacher, when you go to a library, you see that the setting, it is very quiet, it is very grand. You are expected to be very quiet and go about your own business. There is a certain kind of serenity and authority. But in contrast, the 18th century workshop was something completely different. So there are certain adjectives that Danton himself has used for the kind of setting it was. It was brawny, bawdy, rowdy, and crowded. Now, when there were major publications like the encyclopedia coming out, you required a lot of labor, you required a lot of manpower. So there was a concept called le voyage, so which meant that this was the sum that the worker would have made during the time he spends in the journey. So people from different parts of the region, the surrounding region, a lot of laborers were hired by these printing press, and they were provided with the la voyage, which was a sum of money. So the journey, it is a major motive when you are studying the print culture. It sort of became a way of life, and for the workers, it was nothing but paid vacation. So you take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, an entire month to reach somewhere, and then you are paid for that entire duration when you were just traveling, hiking, and traveling in groups and so on. So this became a way of life, and the workers, nevertheless, they were very unreliable. You could not rely on them. So they would just take the voyage and then they would suddenly disappear, and they would spend their time in bars and poorhouses and so on. So hiring and firing culture is very predominant. The tenure of work, it was very erratic, irregular, and short. And workers were treated like commodities. They were treated like things. But nevertheless, if you study the workers themselves, you will find that these workers kind of had they were a community by themselves. They had their own system of information. They had their own slang that they used. There was a practice called debauch where they would go to whorehouses and so on. And there was no divide between work and play. It was all mixed up. Now, the working, I told you earlier that book history is very anecdotal in nature, and so La Brise is an anecdote. And I think Robert Duncan has also written a book by the name La Brise. And this situation, which is known by the name La Brise, was a source of comic relief for the workers. Now, if I tell you what this incident is, you will be absolutely horrified. So La Brise was the name. La Brise is the Grey, which was the name of the mistress's cat, like the employer's wife. And the workers felt that the cat was treated way better than they were. So the cat was given the choicest morsels from the mistress's plate itself, and so on. And so the workers were so pissed off, and let me remind you, they were absolutely brawny, body, rowdy, and all of that. So they held a huge grudge against this cat, Louisa. And one day they decided to stage a massacre. So, massacre of the cat. So what they did initially was, for a few days every night, they used to stand outside the window of the employer's house, and one of them, who was particularly very good at mimicry and so on, he would imitate the sounds of the cat and disturb the master and the mistress. And after a point, the employer was so irritated and so annoyed that he said that you can simply get away with the cat, do whatever you want to. And these workers, they massacred the cat. And later on, the act of massacring, killing the cat, became a source of entertainment for them. They often started mimicking it and acting it out, and this was a kind of insider's joke that they had.
Vidisha,
So this is
uh,
an art.
hello.
Yes.
Yeah, Vidisha,
Yeah,
I
yeah, I
think
can hear you.
there is a lot of noise from your side. Uh, I guess. Are you using
Okay.
headphones? If you could use earphones or something.
Yes.
Yeah, that will be.
Yeah, I have plugged in the earphones. Is
Okay.
it clear now?
Yeah, but from
Is
the
it clear?
background there is a lot of noise, so that's why.
Let me check just a minute.
Ah,
Is it okay now? Hello?
yes, yes, way much better. Yeah,
It is okay? Yeah, it was the
yeah.
fan, I guess.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Sorry to interrupt. Please continue. Yeah.
no, no problem.
Ah,
So, this is the artisanal element. Okay, okay. So this is the artisanal element in the history of communication, where you are, you're not looking at, so this is not about Voltaire, I'm not talking about the Enlightenment, but I'm talking about something like what actually went behind the scenes in the production of ideas or books that led to the Enlightenment. So, so this is what history of the book actually does. Then again, toward a history of reading is a study by Danton. So he says that how people read is more revealing than what they read. Now, even if you look at your own patterns of studying, some of us like to read out loud, some of us prefer silent reading, some of us like to read in groups, and even I am very particular, for instance, setting my room and creating an atmosphere, a comfortable atmosphere for reading. So, how a person reads tells a lot about the person, is what Danton is claiming. And reading patterns from the archives, from the library records, also say a lot between connections between literary genres and social classes. So the lower classes, the working classes, they often preferred very scandalous and thrilling novels, which gave them, which was, a source of gossip for them. Or there is also an online course where Robert Danton talks about the history of the book in the 18th century. And there were many writers who wrote anonymously about the private lives and the scandals of the royal house. For instance, about the king and his mistresses and so on. And they would use nicknames, and there were also keys to this book. People would actually try to decode that who is this incident about. So library records tell us a lot about these literary genres and which classes preferred which genre. So back then, reading was mostly done in groups by the fireside, and reading was considered to be a social activity for the common people. Sometimes they even hired readers who would read out to them as they were working in these presses and so on. So places of reading could be barns and taverns and these workshops and so on. Whereas for the educated elite, it was much of a private experience. And also, back then in the 18th century, the book was not bound. You would just get sheets which were like folded together and tied down, and you had the choice. The reader, the buyer, had the choice to kind of put whichever cover of his choice and get it bound in whichever way they liked it, like cloth binding, leather binding. So the way a book looked back then also revealed a lot about the classes. Whereas the bibliothèque blue that I mentioned earlier, it came in a simple blue chart paper, like a blue chart paper kind of a cover, and it was mostly preferred by the working classes. Then there were also reading clubs with a small monthly payment, like you have a lot of book cafes and so on these days. And but the physical element in reading was never overlooked. For instance, there was also an article which talked about reading as a very harmful activity, which kind of, you know, affected your back, your eyesight, and so on. And the shift to silent reading from the earlier centuries to now, it is also a very major shift that requires to be studied, and it makes reading a very, very interior experience as opposed to reading in these taverns and barns and so on. And so, reading has a history. It was not always and everywhere the same. That is what Danton is saying. And also, he asks questions like, does reading change with different patterns and different scripts? For example, in the Persian and Arabic, you have the letters which go from the right to the left. For the Chinese, you read vertically, you have pictographs. So, or the different bindings. Earlier, you had the scroll, and now you turn pages. Now you are again back to scrolling on your screens. So, do these aspects also change the interiority of reading? Is a certain question that Danton is posing. So these are some pictures from the 17th and 19th century. The 17th century reading wheel, this was used by scholars who did not want to waste their time turning pages. Okay, so they wanted to use their time economically, and every section on the wheel, or every spoke on the wheel had one page open, and they would look like. Hello?
Hello,
Hello?
hello.
I think
Yeah,
someone's
yeah,
mic was
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's switched off now. Yeah.
mute
Okay,
it. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So this is the 17th century reading wheel, and we have an image from the 19th century of a French bookworm. So this is showing you a man who's completely hunched back. You see his eyes have completely gone inside, become hollow like sockets, and he is immersed in a book. So this was about the harmful physical impacts of reading. And this picture is about a family gathering. So in the French, it was known as La Vie. So this is a fireside gathering, and in German, it was known as Spinnstube. So while the children played and women sewed and so on, men repaired tools, there would be someone who could read, who was literate, and he would often read out, near the fireside, read out excerpts from the Bible. It was mostly the Bible, and also from these popular chapbooks and Bibliothèque Blue and so on. So this is what reading looked like in the earlier centuries. Now let us talk about the Indian context, the coming of the book in India. Now, as you know that in the East we had paper way before the West, but we also had a very strong tradition of orality. So when we are talking about the history of the book in India, which is relatively unexplored, we must also keep in mind that before print, we had a very strong oral tradition, and printing comes to us in a very colonial context. Okay, and the first printing press was set up in India by the Portuguese in 1556. And this one is a case study by Anandita Ghosh, who's talking about the uncertain coming of the book in India. So she's talking about Bengal. So the earlier pamphlets that were printed, the very first printing press that was set up in Bengal, it dealt with Christianity, expounding Christianity. So pamphlets were distributed to people, and so it was completely missionary in nature. And then there is also a study of evolution from manuscript to print. Now, when you look at Bengal of the 16th, 17th, 18th century, you will see that there is a very clear divide between the British and the urban literati, or the elite intelligentsia on one side, and the other classes. So there was a divide between the written word and the spoken word. So the written language had its origin in a very purist Sanskrit, whereas the spoken language, it was a mixture of medieval Bengali, Perso-Arabic, and so on, very colloquial and vernacular in nature. So when print first arrived in Bengal, it was a kind of concern of the urban literati, educated reformists, to kind of civilize this vernacular language. And they were hoping that printing or print would kind of modernize and purify the language. And somebody's mic is on, I think. Hello? Hello?
Wait, I'm checking. Wait a second.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah. It's switched off. Everyone is mute now.
All right.
Yeah.
So there was an attempt towards a civilizing drive, hoping that the printed book would modernize and purify language. You know that with orality, something is always added, or like Chinese whispers. When you're playing the game of Chinese whispers, by the time you come to the last participant, the message is completely fabricated and changed and so on. So this was something that happened in case of orality, oral tradition. But the moment you write something down, it is codified, it is set in stone. So people, the reformists, the elite Bengalis, they were hoping that the book would codify the language and make it more pure. But that did not happen. In fact, if you go to study the early preprint culture in Bengal, there was a tradition of kathakatas or like kathaks, who basically narrate stories or incidents from Indian Puranas and mythologies. And so people used to gather outside the temple in hundreds and thousands, and there would be a Kathak who would narrate or who would perform these mythological episodes. And then there was something called Kobi Lorai, which is Kabi is basically the poet, Kavi, and Lorai is Ladai, so which was a kind of Jugalbandi. So these were certain oral traditions that were very, very prominent in Bengal. And when print came in, these traditions kind of started penetrating into the printed world. So there was one area known as the Black Town or the Bottala area. The Bottala is basically under the banyan tree, and it was towards the northern part of Kolkata. And then the south, Jorasanko and so on, or the College Street, you would have the elite and the upper classes. So in the Bottala area, you will see that the printing presses were growing like anything. And the material that was printed was pamphlet literature, sensational romances which were scandalous or which were very obscene or erotic in nature. And there were tiny novellas, short stories, and chapbooks, and people absolutely loved them. So they were churning out far more chapbooks and novellas than the urban elite and the other printing presses. So James Long talks about one such book that it is a hideously obscene book with 20 most filthy pictures. So mostly these were mythological episodes or certain love stories that are a part of folklore and so on. And there would also be beautiful illustrations and so on, which according to Long were absolutely filthy. And there were no bookshops as such till 1850s. So books were sold by hawkers and peddlers. And these hawkers and peddlers, they were employed by the various printing presses, and they would work only seasonally. Like they would work for 8 months, and in the rainy season, they would work on the cultivation in their fields and so on. And books were sold in the rural interiors by these hawkers and peddlers in fairs and festivals and roadside markets. So through the entire study, we get to see a lot of collision and negotiation taking place between orality and print culture. And we see that the vernacular found a more prominent platform for expression. And so the early printed book was very labyrinthine in nature, and it was appropriated and internalized largely by the lesser elite groups. So this was about Kolkata, and then finally exploring manuscripts in scribal culture in Nashik. So for my MA dissertation in book history, I decided to choose this topic because I had just overheard and read somewhere that the vadas or the old houses or mansions in Nasik, some of them belonged to learned pandits and so on. And they had most of these families, they have a huge collection of manuscripts. So in Nasik, so in these vadas, in the Sarvajanik Vachanalay, that is the public library, and the HPT College Library, that is Bhau Sahib Vartak Library, there are over 1 lakh manuscripts on a wide range of subjects. And most of them are in Sanskrit, but the scripts are different. Like you will find Brahmi Lipi, Sharda Lipi, Modi Lipi, so there are different scripts. And what I discovered in course of my research was that Nashik had a rich tradition of grammarians of Sanskrit who lived here and who wrote books on Sanskrit grammar. Then my dissertation also deals with the kind of material used, the paper and the ink used in the production of these manuscripts. Now, I also discovered from the location written on on a majority of the manuscripts, it says Tirbhandeshwar Lane. Now, Tirbhandeshwar is a Shankar temple or a Shiva temple in the old part of the city. And from the address or the location that is written on many of these manuscripts, we can decipher that it was that area, that lane, was the hub of all the scribal activity that went on in Nasik. And people from, like Varanasi, Nasik also has, it is known as a pilgrimage city and so on. And we have the Kumbh Mela and so on and so forth on the Jyotirlingas. So it is known, it has this religious dimension to it. So there were pandits coming from Varanasi, from Kashi, who would stay here in different pathshalas. They would write these copies. They would make copies of these religious books. Now, this study helps me recreate or reconstruct micro histories of the city or micro narratives as opposed to the standard histories that we study in our conventional history books. Okay? And it also helps you study the socio-cultural dynamics.
Hello.
Yeah?
Hello, Vidisha.
Yes? Yes?
Hello.
Hello? Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, now your voice is breaking. I think some connectivity issue is there from your end or what? Just check out.
No, there is no issue as such. Am I clear now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess there is some voice
Yeah,
coming on.
Okay, okay.
So,
I think someone's microphone is on.
no, everyone is,
Hello?
I mean, everyone's mic is
Okay,
mute. Uh,
okay, okay.
yeah,
Am I audible now? Is it clear?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay. So, this study also helps you look at the micro narratives of the city, which are not told in the conventional history. Okay. And then the different preservation techniques that were used. And finally, digitization. A lot of these manuscripts are now being digitized. So this is a picture of a manuscript by the name Vritta Rachanakar. This is a Sanskrit manuscript. And if you look at the picture, it looks like just a line that is drawn in the center of the page. But if you take a microscope and look carefully, you will realize that it is an entire shloka, which is a shlok, which is written in microscopic letters. So we see a lot of creativity and different styles used in these manuscripts. So this is called a Sukshma Aksharati Poti, that is a manuscript that is written in extremely fine microscopic letters, and it was usually written with a thorn. Okay. Now, something about the scribes who wrote these manuscripts. So, on the front page, on the title page, you see that you will see the name of the scribe written, who is it copied by. And there was a practice, there was a tradition of writing the names of at least four generations. Okay, so for instance, written by so and so, son of so and so, grandson of so and so, for four generations. And this was to kind of pay respect to the elderly of the family and also to avoid ambiguity. For instance, the ambiguity of the creator who had copied that manuscript. And some were for public use, whereas some were for private collections. And there were three labels that these manuscripts were divided into. One was for the self. So this indicated that the manuscript was copied for somebody's personal library, for somebody's personal collection. The second category is for others, which indicates that it is made for the use of other people, for the benefit of other people. And the third kind of address was dedicated to God. And mostly religious texts would have this kind of an address that this manuscript, it's like Samarpan, Devala Samarpan Kereli. And it was connected to the Hindu philosophy of work is worship. So somebody would copy the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, and just write dedicated to God and did not expect to keep it for himself. Okay. And also, when one went on Tirtha Yatra or a pilgrimage, there was a practice of copying these codices, whichever which they came across at the place of worship. So these are also some observations from the study. And one interesting thing is that many of these manuscripts have these disclaimers, which are very, very witty. So these were written by the scribes. So they would say that, I have given it in Sanskrit, and under that there is the English meaning of that, English translation. So the first quote says that I have merely copied the text as I have seen it. If there is any mistake, it is not mine. Okay. So here the copyist or the scribe, he's kind of detaching himself from any errors or what we call typo today. Okay. In the second one, it says, I have put together my mind and my back in the writing of this text. Please preserve it carefully. It's very interesting to note how they are, talking about both the mind and the back. So in this Tirthandeshwar lane, scribes would sit on either side of the road and they would copy one page each and so on. So I think that explains mind and back both. Then we have the second last one that says, uh, the book says, protect me from oil, from water, from loose binding, and from the hands of the fool. So, this is a very funny one, which says that the manuscript should not land into the hands of a foolish person. And the last one says that do not steal this. Whoever steals this, his clan would meet destruction. So this is like a kind of curse which the scribe has put on the title page. Now, I was looking at these manuscripts are from the Gaidani Vada in Nashik, and this is their collection of manuscripts. And the Gaidani Vada alone has around 3,000 manuscripts on the Vedas, Puranas, different Shastras, such as there is a copy of the Bhagavad Gita written in Persian. Then the microscopic one is again from the Gaidani Vada, and memoirs from the Panipat battle and so on, written in Modi script. The language is Marathi and the script is Modi. This is another peculiar manuscript. So this can be folded, like it is written on a very continuous paper and it can be folded. And if you leave it down from the terrace or the window, the height, this manuscript can go down like 3 stories. So it is a very, very long or tall manuscript. And this one, you see the illustrations. This is all handwritten, okay, handwritten by scribes. You see beautiful illustrations, golden letters used. This is a copy of the Surya Stotra. This is the Tirthandeshwar temple as it looks today, as of now. And it was in the lanes near the temple that all the scribal activity took place. Now, finally, we have come from like manuscripts to print to talking about the process behind the production and the work culture and the preprint culture in India. And the final stage now that we have come to today is navigation. So this talks about the hypertext or the hyperlinks that we have today in the digital age. So I don't know how many of you still like to use or collect or buy and hold physical copies of books, or whether you have a Kindle and prefer ebooks and so on. So now we are not turning over the leaves or turning over the pages, but we are navigating across the different hyperlinks. Now, what does the hyperlink do? So it kind of helps you overcome the physical limitations of the book. For instance, if a particular form or a genre is grounded in the oral or performative tradition, like the ballad, for instance, or say Shakespeare, if you go to actors' workshops of Shakespeare, they will always tell you that Shakespeare was meant to be enacted and not read. So when you have forms like this, So the paper, the printed word, has its own limits, and therefore it is kind of incompetent to arouse all the senses. But with the coming of, say, the facsimile editions, or you have audiobooks, or these days you can look up Shakespeare on Wikipedia, and then you will have YouTube links to watch the plays and so on. So the hypertext, because of the hypertext, the information is no longer only for the eyes, but it also caters to the oral and the oral, and it allows you to navigate through all these pages. So, but you know that it is very labyrinthine in nature. For instance, you might be reading something. You can do entire assignments, projects, dissertations without leaving your desk. You can just have your laptop and maybe a smartphone by your side, and you don't really have to go to the libraries now and look at the catalogs and search for the books. So the hyperlinks lead you from one source to another, and very often you begin with something, and by the time you come to the end of it, you are completely lost. So the scroll that we had, the ancient scroll that we had initially, we have again started incorporating the this language, or the use of these words like scrolling. From reading, we have now gone to scrolling, like scrolling Instagram or just scrolling through your feed. And now you no longer read, you just browse through the articles. Okay. And also, a hypertext can never be complete. It can pass forward in time indefinitely. For instance, when you have critical books, or you often have, the new version or the new edition, the revised edition, and so on. So, a physical copy always has a limit. You need to update it, or in some cases, there is no other edition available. But as for a hypertext, for instance, I remember one article that I was reading about Alexander Supertramp from Into the Wild. And there was one article written by the author which was talking about the cause of his death. And a few years later, he had again updated and changed the information, saying that it was a wrong notion, a wrong information that he had received from somewhere, and he would like to correct it. So, with hypertext, information around you, it is indefinite. There is no limit to it as one book that you read. And so, as a result, there is decentralization of information. And with the coming in of ebooks, you can no longer smell the books like we do, or feel the pages, the texture of the pages, or write in the margins and so on. So, from the physical, we have now moved to the virtual, the digital space. And these are some further readings that you may want to note. So, the history of the books, work culture, history of reading, these are all by Danton, and unacknowledged revolution. I think you can take it down, take a screenshot maybe. And these are the online courses. These are all available on edX. And I think the history of the book in 17th and 18th century Europe is by Robert Danton himself. And in this courses, you can actually look at the Harvard Library, the Hutton Library. You can look at the medieval manuscripts from Danton's collection. You can look at the equipment and the different tools used for printing and so on. So if any one of you, if you're interested, you may want to look at these courses. Okay, I think that is all.
Thank you,
Hello?
Disha. That was hello.
Okay,
Can
I
you
hope
hear
I
me?
make sense.
Yeah,
Yes,
you did.
yes, I can.
That was a nice presentation. I
Okay,
guess.
I think there are a lot of.
There are some questions. So, Arjun sir, shall
Okay,
we open for a question?
Yes,
yes,
yes.
yes,
Yeah,
all right.
go ahead.
Yeah.
I hope I made sense. There was actually a lot. I'll just look at the comments and the questions once.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Please do.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, something about them. Sorry for the noise. Um, okay, there's a question by Sejal Yadav which says, how will you compare the local street literature of Nasik and Kolkata? Well, in Nasik, Nasik is known as a place of pilgrimage since ancient times, and whereas Kolkata, I'm not sure if it exactly has the same reputation as Nasik. But about the street literature in Anandata Ghosh's essay of coming of the book in India, where she's talking about preprint cultures in Kolkata. So she has mentioned that there was the Pathshala system, which was open to all the classes, and so even though like sorry, the religious texts and texts in Sanskrit were not accessible to everyone. People could still read the vernacular language, and as a result, the Bhattala presses or the printing presses in the Bhattala area, they churned out a lot of material which catered to the tastes of these readers, the working classes. This is about Kolkata. Whereas in case of Nasik, what I found is that the working classes or the lower classes, they absolutely did not have any kind of access to this. All the texts that I have seen and even the collection of manuscripts, they are only and only in Brahmin households, and they are all in Sanskrit. Most of them, they are very, very ancient, because you know that we had paper earlier than the West. So, and they are in different scripts. So you will not find a book which is in the local vernacular Marathi that is spoken here. It would be in Nevari Lipi or Sharda Lipi of Nepal or Brahmi Lipi. So they are accessible to a very few. So there is no such thing as local street literature in Nasik. It is all books of grammar, books on Vedas, Puranas, and the different Shastras. I hope that answers your question. Were the manuscripts available to the common people? No. In fact, even how I got introduced to these manuscripts in Nasik is that Maharashtra Times, the newspaper, they had organized a heritage walk. So the heritage walk took us to Gaidini Wada, many Vadas in and around Nasik district of the Brahmin families have these manuscripts, but they are not accessible to the common public. Luckily, I was acquainted to them and I approached them for my research, so I could go and have a look at it. And but recently, in the last few years, they are genuinely concerned about the preservation of these manuscripts, and that is why they are looking at digitizing the manuscripts. There are certain scholars of Indology like Anita Joshi, Dr. Anita Joshi, and Dinesh Vaidya, who are studying these manuscripts in Nasik, and they are also digitizing them. So they were not available to the common people. Also, were the religious texts accessible only to the elites? Yes, they were. Which of the libraries in Nasik did you visit for manuscripts? Okay, this is by Kavita ma'am. I visited the the Sarvajanik Vachanalaya Nasik, known as Savannah, and also the Bhausaheb Vartak Library in HPT College.
So,
Hello, ma'am.
did you visit Subhash Vachanalaya, the oldest library in Nashik, which was established in 1942, which is situated in Budwarpet? Did you visit that library? Because that's the oldest library in Nashik. Because I'm also from Nashik, so I know that.
Yes, yes. Okay. No, actually, I was doing this dissertation during my MA, so in the final semester, and I had like barely 2 days to, in the middle of my internals and so on. Vicky knows that I actually had to take his permission so that we could go to Nasik to, do our primary research. So I could go to Sarvajanik Vachanalaya and I went to HPT since that is the college I studied in for my graduation, and I also happen to know, I know the Sanskrit professor HOD there, Leena Hunnargikar. So I went to HPT and I went to the Gaidhani Vada. and I
So
talked to
probably for your further
Mr.
research,
Ramesh Padwar.
probably for your further research, you would like to visit that library. You might get more manuscripts there because it was established in 1942. That's the oldest library in Nashik. Subhash
Okay,
Vachanalay, situated in Budwarpet. So please do visit that library. So
okay. I definitely
older
will.
than
Yes, yes.
Persa Parshuram Saikadkar Sarvajanik Vachanalay and any other library in Nashik. So please do visit.
Okay. Yes, yes. I don't want to take this further. Back
Yes,
then, I was really pressed for time, so this is all I could gather, and I want to take it further.
yes,
But it kind of lies more within the scope of Indology and manuscriptology. So there are certain limitations as a student of English literature that I
yes,
have while dealing with this subject. But I definitely would like to see it. Thank you so much, ma'am.
yes.
Then there is a comment by Anil sir. Um, are the old manuscripts in Nashik Sarvajanik Vachanalaya stored? Yes, yes. Even in the HPT library and in the Sarvajanik Vachanalaya, they are in the reference sections.
Okay.
Anything else? Do both HPT College Library and take? Yes, they do. And these documents, they are being preserved and very well maintained. They also have a record of all these manuscripts, the name, the title, the date procured, and so on. And they're also looking at digitizing all of them for further preservation and access. There is a
Just
question by
to,
Nupur Shah. Yes,
I think
yes, sir.
Sarvajanik Vachanalaya was earlier situated at Saraf Bazar in an old building.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh, I have memories
So
of
this
that
one,
old.
Yeah, yeah.
okay, this one is near the Nehru Garden, Gymkhana area.
Yeah.
And okay,
There,
anything else, sir?
there is a, yeah, sorry.
Question by Nupur
Yeah,
Shah. You mentioned the Persian translation of Gita, certainly a historical rarity. Do you think this phenomenon points to inter-community dialogue? Yes, obviously. Like there is a Persian translation. So these were the copies. And as I told you that I also found a lot of like micro histories of the city, like the changing vocabulary, the names of the places. But I did not include that in this presentation to keep it restricted to the nature and scope of the subject. I did not want to delve into the history of Nasik as such. But yes, there is a lot of dialogue which can be seen. And in addition to, and the Persian, it's not a translation. I mean, it is the script. The script used. Hello? Yeah. So the Persian copy of the Gita, and in addition, there is also a copy of the Ramayana, which is in the Nevari Lipi of Nepal. So we can deduce from this that there was a lot of transaction taking place. And again, these scribes were people who were traveling from, say, Varanasi to Nasik, who were often like pilgrims. And they would do this out of like the work is worship philosophy. And they would copy this. What were the other fascinating manuscripts of history of India you came across your research? Okay. So yeah, the Nevari Lipi, obviously. Then there is a lot about the Tantra, Yuddha, and Shilpa Shastra, the different shastras of India or say Hinduism. The Persian Gita, of course, the folded manuscript, and there are two memoirs of the Panipat, of the Battle of Panipat, which are in the Modi Lipi. But to actually decipher the content of all these manuscripts, you need to work with manuscriptologists, people who are well versed in Modi and Nevari and all the different scripts. Also, you need someone who is a scholar of Sanskrit. So these are certain limitations that I have as a student of English because I'm not very well versed, or in fact, I have no idea of Sanskrit. Um, yes, there are the manuscripts on the epics as well, and I guess the library, yeah, we call it Savana, right? Sarvajanik Vachnalaya Nasik. It is popularly known as Savana, even in Nepali script. Yeah, that is the Nevari Lipi. I have all those images in my dissertation and also in my camera, but I couldn't put all of them here. Darshan has a question. When books create an oration for the historical events, according to you, how much of justice is done to the content when it gets made into a movie or web series? I think, Darshan, your question was more into the realm of the translation, the intersemiotic translation or translation versus adaptation debate, rather than the realm of book history. So, could you be more clear? Because when we are talking about a movie or a web series, the director's ideology or the author's ideology or the way they want to present it always comes into picture. For example, you might have heard of Anand Neelkantan, who has written two novels on myth fictions, Asura and Ajaya. So Asura is entirely from Ravana's perspective, Ramayan from Ravan's perspective, and Ajaya from Duryodhan's perspective, or the perspective of the Kauravas. So it depends on the creator. Does history of
I
books play a
want
major
to ask
role in the?
how much of
Yes.
history books helps in the making. Like I had seen one movie. It was on Gandhiji,
Okay.
and they only referred to the
Okay.
books on Gandhiji and of all the eras and all the centuries. So, is the element of
Mhm.
history in books like indirectly creating the visuals we are imagining?
You mean the discipline? Are you talking about the discipline? Does it create the visuals?
Yeah.
Um, Okay, like see, it depends on what the scholar is looking at. For some, they might be interested in looking at the history, the conventional history that you know, or the canon. Whereas there might be someone like
Okay.
Danton or Anandita Ghosh who are more interested in looking at the micro histories, like the books, the chapbooks. These were read by clerks and the working class when they were usually ferrying across and so on. So it depends on which perspective you want to present. Book history as a discipline, it deals with the production and the distribution and the consumption. So which pattern of consumption you want to study depends on the interest of the scholar. Just like the crown
Okay.
is
Okay. That
based on
explains a
books.
lot.
Okay, okay. You mentioned that many Vadas have these manuscripts. Do they have multiple copies of these, or each have different? They have multiple copies of a few of the popular ones, but most of them they are single unique copies. Did you also come across some Buddhist scriptures from Pali literature, Therigatha and Athagatha and Tripitaka? No, sir, I did not. Not in Nasik, or at least not in the number of manuscripts that were made available to me for my study. Now, some of them they are in a very very vulnerable condition, and they do not give you access to their entire collection. But I will definitely check the records that I have. I do have a list of all the titles, and but I did not see any. Nupur Shah is asking, as you mentioned, the history of the book is necessarily an interdisciplinary field. How interlinked is the realm of visual arts, especially today's digitalized scenario, to the study of the book? Actually, this is about the origin. When history of the book as a discipline, it originated, scholars were mainly interested in the preprint and the print era since the movable type. But as you know that with the changing demands of time, we are no longer restricted to the physical, but the e-books, the internet, it has become an integral part of our study. So visual arts, when Jerome K. McGann, he talks about the facsimile editions. He's talking about the visual aspect. For instance, he gives the example of Robert Burns, because we know that Robert Burns wrote ballads. And it is from that example that I said that the physical book has certain restrictions when it comes to certain genres. So in these facsimile editions, you can listen to maybe the audio, which is kind of playing it out for you, or even recreating plays or dramas. So I think the history of the book, for people who are not really interested in the antiquity, like me, I tend to go back into the past. But people who are trying to explore what technology has done and what is the future of the book, okay, it's known as the book in some of the universities like the Harvard and so on. It's not just history of the book. So if you want to look at the scope of the book from here on, the transition from the printed world, the physical, to the digital is also an interesting area of study. And the visual does play, and the visual and audio visual both, it does play an important role in this. Does it answer your question, Nupur?
Yeah.
Anything
Just to
else?
add, to that, now we are also moving towards
Yes.
something called digital humanities, which is
Yes. Yes. Yes.
basically focusing on the whole archivization of the texts and so on. So in Kolkata, which I also should mention that
Mhm.
now Kolkata is suffering from a lot of havoc going on
Right.
there. We should remember that. Uh, just to mention,
Mhm.
but yeah, in Kolkata, Supriya Chaudhary and Amlandas Gupta has started this, uh,
Yes.
let's say,
Project
in India.
Vichitra, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So
Project
that
Vichitra. Yeah.
project Vichitra. So something like that is
Right.
happening, and with visuals and books that was asked earlier. Again, in West Bengal, there was this tradition of Patachitrakar. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, and these Patachitrakars, what their job was, they used to, in the morning, they would go to places and they would paint stories. So, the stories that they have heard from their ancestors, they would paint those stories and then read those stories to the audience,
Right.
or sing those stories. So this tradition of Patachitrakar is also a very good example of relationship of visual arts. And if you want to explore book history in that context, then this line would be visible, where people would hear, then transcribe it in pictures, which is a visual, and then again
Mhm.
read it aloud to people.
Yes.
So that's also an interesting connection.
Right. And I think even in the quote, like not the quote, but the remark that James Long made. So there are a lot of pictures from this mythological story or the local folklore and romances. So it is precisely like referring to them. He says that they are really filthy and obscene. And also for the manuscripts that I have looked at, the preservation techniques of these manuscripts, they are pretty archaic. Like it would involve applying turmeric paste to all the pages, putting neem leaves, or in some cases also the skin that the snake sheds or peacock feathers would be put in this pages of the manuscript to preserve it. It was believed that it would increase the longevity of these manuscripts. But you know that today we can no longer readily get snake skin or peacock feathers and so on. And so even the Gaidani Vada, the Zoshi Vada, and these people in Nashik, they are working towards the digitization, and it is still in process.
Vidisha,
Amdalina, yes, yes.
how difficult was it for you to get access to these documents? Because even the government in India is not very supportive when it comes to digitization or preserving all these documents. Obviously, you had access to some private collections also,
Right,
but
right,
when it
right.
comes to libraries, it's very, very difficult.
My primary source was the Gaidanivada, and since I knew them personally, so they gave me access to a lot of them. As for the library, I did have to take special permissions and so on, and so it is difficult. Also, preservation in India, keeping records of the manuscripts, we Indians are not really very good with that. So it is problematic. But I frankly did not have that much of a problem. Only with Sarvajanik Vachanalaya, I could not take a close look and so on. They just gave me access to the catalog, and this is what we
Okay.
have. A librarian just showed me a couple of manuscripts. I could not really, look at it closely and study it or take pictures as I could do with the manuscripts in Gaidanivada.
Hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything else? The library management isn't very serious about these manuscripts too. Yeah, sadly, in many places, people do not know about these manuscripts at all. In fact, even I got to know about the tradition of grammarians in my very own city pretty late through a heritage walk organized by Maharashtra Times. So, and many families do not really want to do away or give away this information because they still think that it is something very, very personal, a part of their private heritage. And very few people, like the Gaidanis, actually make it available to the public and open it to scholars for further study. Do we have any more
True,
questions?
and the moment they
Yes.
see you with the camera and tripod, they get scandalized.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. But luckily, I did not experience that with my host because I think slightly in case of some of these families, mostly Brahmin families, there is a slight change in their perception now that, with generations who are no longer into Bhikshuki or into, say, grammar or the preservation of these manuscripts and the heritage that they have received from their ancestors, they are more and more worried about how are they going to take forward their legacy. So I think some of them they are trying to make an attempt to make it available to scholars who can actually bring it forward to the world. So I think Anita Joshi and Dilip Vaidya, these are two people. Anita Joshi is an Indologist, and Dilip Vaidya is into archiving. And I think I also visited the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, but we could not really access the manuscripts as such. They just engaged us in some kind of a talk, but we did not get access to it as such.
Obviously, that's Pune.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, that is true.
Okay. I think we should now, we are coming to a conclusion. So,
Yeah, that's all.
uh, so yeah, thank you, Vidisha, for this interesting session. I guess everyone will agree with me when I'm saying this. It was very informative, interesting, as well as the anecdotes that you told were very insightful. So that
Thank
was
you
a
so
really
much.
nice session. I would really request the students who are there, please do explore these areas because you'll get to know more about them as you study.
Yeah, you
So,
can look at the reading lists, I think,
yeah,
the
yeah,
further reading lists and the courses. Yeah.
yes, yes. So with this, we come to a conclusion of our series. I would like Arjun sir to please.
Yeah. Thank you, Vicky. As Vicky has rightly pointed out, that we have come to an end. The last part of the session, that is a vote of thanks. Uh, for that, indeed, I feel very privileged to propose vote of thanks. At the outset, let me thank all of you and put on record my heartfelt gratitude. Thank you so much for having encouraged us by taking keen interest in the webinar lecture series Interface, a webinar series on literature and beyond. conducted by the Department of English, Ramnarain Ruia College, Mumbai. In this lecture series, we had planned four scholarly talks by different speakers. The very first talk was delivered by my colleague Mr. Vicky Gaikwad, who spoke on mutualism between cinema and literature, a historical perspective. It was such a lively and interactive session. He beautifully explored the blend of cinema and English literature that developed through 20th century to the present. The second webinar was delivered by Dr. Kavita Patil on leading to the translation, introduction to the translation studies. In her excellent presentation, she focused on various concerns in the translation studies, and while doing so, she referred to different theories of translation as well. The third webinar was delivered by Dr. Anil Sonawni on being in doubt. In his presentation, he beautifully explained various concepts such as being, dazing, isolation, quarantine, excuse me, punishment, pandemic, literature, and so on, with special reference to the philosophical foundation. In his lucid talk, he referred to various philosophers like Heidegger, Kant, Derrida, and many more. And today, of course, we have lecture by Ms. Vidisha Babul, who wonderfully explained the entire landscape of the history of the book through her talk on the art of pages, a discussion on history of the book. In her informative talk, besides history of the book, she wonderfully explained the history of reading, reading habits, and also other subtle elements like socio-economic and cultural elements that go into the formation of reading habits through ages. I'm sure our student participants, colleagues, and teacher friends must have benefited out of this endeavor of ours. So, in the very beginning, on behalf of the Department of English, let me thank our proactive college management, ever supportive principal, vice principals, because without this entire support system, the present webinar series could not have been realized. Further, I thank all the speakers for sparing their valuable time and giving outstanding talks on interface, literature, and beyond. My special thanks must go to Mr. Vicky Gaikwad, in, who, in true sense, has brought his creative ideas into actuality. So, thank you, Vicky, for that. I also thank all the teachers from Ruia College as well as from other colleges for having participated in our webinar series. Then, last but not the least, I thank all our students who have participated wholeheartedly, though they are going through a very rough period and catch 22 sort of situation during this lockdown period. I am sure they must have enjoyed the webinar lecture series. In fact, I think I must tell you the idea behind this series was to introduce our prospective students to the literature course. With this, I end my vote of thanks here by making an appeal to all of you to continue supporting us in our future endeavors as well. Thank you and stay safe.
Yeah.
Hey,
So that,
excuse me, sir.
huh?
Good
Yeah, yeah.
evening to, yeah, this is Vikas Prasad. Good evening to everyone. I would also like to thank everyone, every speaker, and thank you for organizing such a good seminar for us. Thank you so much. It was like really worth of our evening. Like we used to like just hang around outside or read something, but this was something really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm so sad that I missed yours, Vicky sir. I hope if you have recorded that, I can watch that too. And thank you so much for organizing it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for your kind words, Vikas. And we'll definitely make the links available once we are done
Sorry,
with all the
Vikas.
formalities.
Yeah,
Vikas
yeah,
Prasad.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I would, with the, since we are coming to the end, I must thank Arjun sir for being such a good, I would say, a support system that we
I
have
should
at the
thank you, Vicky. I should thank
yeah.
you. Please
So yeah.
don't mention. Yeah.
So thank you everyone. Please fill up the feedback, and I have already mentioned it in the comments. Please fill up the feedback and attendance forms, and please make sure that you write your names and designation and affiliation properly in the